Marc from ADM Investor Services International, with some thoughts on the various bits of Q2 GDP data that we've had over the last couple of weeks, and how things look for the second half of the year, particularly in the context of what else we know in terms of inputs. So my first table is some selected GDP rates for Q1 and Q2. And just to really emphasize a couple of points, as much as we like to report the US numbers in very dramatic fashion, they do the seasonally adjusted annualized rates. When you put it in context of what it would look like if we did proper quarter-on-quarter reporting, actually it turns out the United States wasn't nearly as bad as a lot of places in Europe. Indeed, perhaps the key point here is if we're worrying about the US economy, perhaps we should be worrying about the European economies rather more, because they've outperformed pretty much most of them. Secondly, is the point about China. Yes, it obviously took a huge hit in the first quarter, but the second quarter it's already recovered a lot. Whereas if one's looking at the rest of those countries in Europe and the US, what we're talking about is a situation where they've got a long, hard road back. And indeed, the picture in a lot of other countries is not so great in Asia either. So as much as we can be optimistic about China, probably going into the second half of the year, they will inevitably be hampered by the weakness elsewhere, first of all. Secondly, one does have to wonder about the wisdom of basically going into a big tussle. As much as I can understand all the reasons in terms of espionage, in terms of unfair trade practices, that's not really quite the point. The point is the world economy needs as many countries to give it a boost as possible. And if we're going to start excluding China, then that could prove to be problematic. But that's by the by. So how do things look for the second half of the year? Well, my second chart is what really worries me, and that is from worldometer.info, and that is on the current state of play with COVID new cases and fatalities. And sadly, that chart tells us that we're still seeing new cases grow. I don't think we can really talk about a second wave here. To me, it looks like very much a first wave. Secondly, it's the fact that it's gone on so long. The fact that it's gone on so long is clearly going to have an impact on consumers and leave some rather more permanent scarring there than one might otherwise expect. And secondly, obviously, consumer spending is the engine of pretty much most economies. So if consumers are going to be under a cloud of fear about infection rates, even if the fatality rates seem to be getting somewhat better, I'll be very, very cautious on that one. It is the very fear of that which is going to make them cautious with their spending, cautious in their overall activity habits, and therefore that is a big headwind to the global economy. So how does this make this look in market terms? Well, I think the interesting thing with the third chart is a chart of the global money supply proxy against the MSCI World Stock Index. As one can see, we have really pumped up world money supply thanks to all the fiscal stimulus, thanks to all the central bank stimulus that we've had. And it doesn't look very much like the same sort of story that GDP numbers are talking about. Rather more realistic is my final table, or my final chart, which is highlighting the fact that for all that monetary stimulus, we're still seeing a lot of downgrades in credit rating terms. We're now running at the sort of levels we were at the height of the GFC, with downgrades outrunning upgrades by a very, very large margin. And that's something which we're going to have to keep a close eye out on in the second half of the year, because I expect it to persist. Those are the thoughts for this week.